Hurricane Helene left devastating impacts across western North Carolina, and some of them we are still learning about. Joining us this week on the Carolina Weather Group, we're happy to welcome back Evan Fisher. He's going to be giving us a satellite tour and an understanding of the before and the after. Joining us on our Carolina Weather Group panel, we have Scotty Powell in Myrtle Beach. We got Tom Miner here in Charlotte with me, and Frank Strait coming along from Columbia, South Carolina. I do want to start this episode, guys, by telling our audio podcast listeners that we love them, we adore them, and we appreciate them subscribing. This is going to be one of those episodes where we try to make sure everything is equal footing for video and audio listeners. This one's going to be probably pretty heavy on the visuals. So if you can do it safely, you can watch on YouTube, or if you're even listening on Spotify, little known feature, we actually publish the video along with the audio. So you can actually, if it's safe to do so, watch along on Spotify. So, Evan, with that disclaimer out of the way, we're going to let you bring up the screen share here. And we know you've been going through these and really trying to analyze the lasting impacts of Helene. You have actually a new website where you're tracking a lot of this. What's that website called?
We got a new website called forwnc.org. That's FORWNC. The goal is to share all of these analyses post Helene, all of this satellite data that we have to work with that really does shed a light on the true scale of the damage in Western North Carolina.
So we'll get a little bit of a snippet of that here on the Carolina Weather Group, and we appreciate you sharing that expertise for us. I'm sure we'll spot things and have questions as we go through, but I'm going to just let you start maybe with whatever comes top of mind for you as you've been going through a lot of this heartbreaking data.
So one of the really wonderful resources that was out there just within a week of the storm was some satellite imagery. And actually, it's not even satellite imagery, it's aerial imagery. So from
Wow.
planes of the damage just immediately after the storm. And that is a huge resource for folks trying to understand where the worst damage occurred and which areas were spared as well. You can see it here on the screen. This is a product put together by NOAA as they fly all of their planes around and collect this really high resolution data. It's kind of like looking at Google Maps, but post storm. So not quite as pretty as Google Maps normally looks. But I will zoom us in here and kind of just take you on a quick tour of some of this visual, this true color imagery. And then I'll also show you some other satellite imagery that we're using to identify areas of significant damage. But first and foremost, we'll look at Lake Lure because Lake Lure, Chimney Rock has really been one of the biggest news stories since Helene. Downtown Chimney Rock was practically wiped off the map by the Broad River as it flowed in. And you can see as we zoom in here, you can already see the buildup of debris in Lake Lure. A lot of people lost their docks. I know people who lost boats in Lake Lure. Uh, to be honest, the people in Lake Lure were much more fortunate than those upstream, upriver. But there's everything that got washed out of Bat Cave and down 74 ended up in this lake. And if we just track back upriver a little bit, you can start to see the Flowering Bridge is a very famous place in Lake Lure, just outside of Chimney Rock. There's been much lament that the bridge was destroyed, and you can see it here. Everything is coated in mud, and mud is an indication that water flowed there, and not just a little bit of water, but a lot. So all of these muddy areas where there's buildings, the Broad River just consumed these during the storm. And you can see here how the Flowering Bridge was unfortunately taken taken down by the strong waters of the Broad River. And even just another quarter mile upriver, it's remarkable to see, remarkable what happened, that the power of water is unbelievable. There used to be some buildings in here, and if we toggle off, let's see, we'll toggle off this imagery, you can see what it used to look like. And this gives you an idea of how much that
Wow.
river changed.
Wow.
It really did widen to a couple hundred feet wide. And it used to just be 50 to 75 feet, and that water was raging through here, taking out buildings along the way, taking out large sections of road. And as we get into downtown Chimney Rock, you can see why there's so much of an issue. There used to be buildings in here, there used to be a road, and you can see they were already working on the road within a few days of the storm, 10 days post-storm. But Chimney Rock was hit very hard, and this is one of the places I wanted to focus on because it's been a big story and it's hard to understand the scale of what happened. But when you see this physiological change in the river as it reroutes itself throughout the Hickory Nut Gorge, it's like the geologic timeline accelerated by 500 years or maybe even 1,000 years, and this river totally changed its course.
Yeah, what this imagery really helps me understand, Evan, is even when the rebuilding is completed and the homes and the businesses come back, they may not be in the same place because the river's not in the same place.
Absolutely. That's going to be the case. And it's wise, to consider these floodplains. And I would say that at times in the past, everywhere is prone to building in floodplains. We see these beautiful plots of land along the river and we want to throw a house or at least an RV on there. And unfortunately, those are the places that are now gone. And we'll have to take a second to think about whether or not we want to rebuild. I know the River Arts District. We'll hop up there on the imagery. The River Arts District is another really popular area in Western North Carolina. It's in Asheville, down on the French Broad River. And unfortunately, much like Chimney Rock, it was practically wiped off the map. And that's one of those locations where there's already ongoing conversation about, will these buildings, will these shops come back? This is a really popular place for artists, and they lost a lot of art down here. You can see places where there used to be buildings, used to be warehouses, and one of these two. Now there are no longer. There we are. This
Wow.
building right here in the middle. I'll circle it for you so you know which one I'm talking about. Is completely gone after the storm. And that is a tough loss for for the River Arts District. And it's crazy how wide the river got. And in fact, that's probably even a great segue into some other imagery that we have to share.
this is just a wild thought. Going back to Chimney Rock,
Yeah,
um, to see how wide the river got, and now you can kind of just see. Obviously, the water's not that wide now, but it really carved out.
yeah.
If this area was to ever get like in a severe drought, with now the river being so small because of the wide space, it's interesting to see. Could there be some stream interruptions during an extreme drought or something like that because you don't have that big concentration of water, which seems to be more spread out.
Absolutely. And one of the big talking points right now in West North Carolina, especially amongst some meteorologists, is we don't know exactly what these rivers are going to do the next time it floods. They have changed. They've rerouted themselves in places. The floodplains are no longer the same. So we'll have to be cautious when the next big flood rolls around. Hopefully that isn't for a long time, but we do get floods here. It happens. And everyone knew that. It's just this one was a lot worse than usual. But there will be folks who suddenly have water in their lawns close to their home where they didn't in previous events. So we'll have to keep a close eye on how we go from that drought to heavy rain, which seems to be a vicious cycle that we're stuck in the Carolinas. I will go ahead and segue us over into some other imagery that we use. And this imagery is actually classified, so not secrecy classified, but classified into categories. So blue is flooded area, green is for wind damage, forest damage, and it's pretty remarkable to see where water was. Now, this isn't even the full extent. This misses some places, but you can see further down here around Brevard, the French Broad was nearly a mile wide in places, and in fact, more than a mile wide, which is a huge, huge scale. Every river and creek in Western North Carolina that could flood, at least from the French Broad Valley northeast, flooded to its fullest extent. And we can see that just from space, the full extent of all of those blue waters. A couple of the more interesting locations, Swannanoa has been talked about a lot. It's been in the news, and it's where I went to high school. It's a very familiar place to me. And the day after the storm, I pulled into Swannanoa after not realizing truly what had happened there. And there were places that there was water, and I just couldn't believe it at the time. Water flowed. I believe at that place I measured it to be 18 feet deep. So, it's deeper the further downriver you go towards Biltmore Village, but 18 feet deep in Swannanoa destroyed a lot of homes. And you can see all of this blue area where normally the water is only this wide, that tiny little strip through here. And yet each one of these blue pixels shows somewhere that there was certainly water. And another great map, another great way to visualize this is this little tool that I've put together on 4WNC.org. And this is my own flood model that I'm working on post-storm. It's not perfect or complete, so it's only showing Swannanoa at the moment. But this gives us an idea of where the water used to be and where it is now. So if we take this back here and look at the imagery post-storm, you can see how the mud is everywhere in Swannanoa. The river just consumed whole portions of the town, and each of these buildings marked in red were deep underwater. I believe red is roughly 10 feet deep. So that's the first story of your home gone. And in a lot of instances, the buildings just didn't remain. And unfortunately, trailer parks or mobile home communities were especially vulnerable to this. This is where I went the day after the storm. I'll take this down here. I drove down this road to go check on my old high school. And as I came over the bridge, at the time, there were still mobile homes in the street. They were strewn through the field. It looked like a war zone. And there used to be a lot of homes here, and now they're not. There were eight, nine mobile homes here, and after the flooding had receded,
Whoa.
that one might still be intact, but these were pretty much wiped out. I used to spend time in this home, and it had every bit of 10, 15 feet of water in it. Swannanoa had a high death toll, unfortunately, somewhere north of 10, though I don't know that exact number. And several of those came from these mobile homes. There are other mobile homes upriver as well as some apartment complexes downtown. But the power of water here was so significant that it moved an entire, not just mobile homes, but full-size homes. You can see this
Wow.
home knocked off from right here, knocked off of its foundation and thrown across the street. Another one there, another one there.
And yet some of them are in the same spot. It's so
Right.
shocking to see the indiscriminate result of some of these homes move, some of them in the same space, and some of them have been pushed into each other.
Absolutely. It is. It's so bizarre, and the power of the water just took them and shoved them. I saw what I saw in Black Mountain. That was really deep water. That was very bad flooding. The homes across the street from us were flooded out. We were surrounded by water. This is just 3 miles downstream of where I was, and yet the power of water seems to be 100-fold compared to what I witnessed. It pushed this entire community into this new reality where everything is destroyed. It's really hard to come back from really a disaster of this magnitude. They will. Don't get me wrong. These people are resilient. But Swannanoa was hit particularly hard.
Evan, is there anything in particular about the geography here or the landscape? I mean, we like James had mentioned, there's some homes that are right next to each other. Some have been damaged, some not. Is there something about the river in this particular area that caused it to be this way? I mean, I'm just looking at the mud. I'm looking at all the water. I'm just curious about the geography here.
We don't have a flood gauge here, which makes it difficult to know exactly what happened. And in time, we'll figure it out. We will talk to everyone who was there, who survived, and there are some harrowing tales of survival in Swannanoa. But I suspect that what happened here was actually more of a wall of water that was
Mhm.
moving down the river, more so than a slow rise. It came all at once. 3 miles upriver, or where I was in Black Mountain, the water went from not even visible from my home to raging against our fence in 10, 15 minutes. And it must have just been a wall of water. It's a 10-foot rise in 15 minutes.
I,
Um,
I
I,
remember the words you spoke on this show after that. You said, I'm a meteorologist. And it shocked and surprised me how quickly it rose. I can't imagine what it was like for people who weren't glued to weather data.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. I like to think I know what's possible around here. Western North Carolina has always been my home, always been my weather focus. And this has completely redefined all of the things that I thought were possible. I never would have imagined that Swannanoa could flood like this, or Chimney Rock could be that devastated. But just upriver of Swannanoa is the North Fork Reservoir, and that is where Asheville gets all of its drinking water. It's something like 20,000 acres. And we, though it's hard to believe, we really were spared a much greater incident because the dam of the North Fork held. Now, it breached and a significant amount of water flowed over it. We don't have high resolution post-storm imagery, but this is that reservoir. And you could see where the water would flow down here past Goose Poop Island and into Grovestone and Swannanoa.
Hard
And
not to
this,
laugh at the name of that,
I know it's brought me
even
some
even in
levity
these
in
times.
difficulty. Yeah. So I saw that shortly after the storm, and it was oddly nice to have a small laugh.
Yeah,
But as water came down out of North Fork, I believe that's one of the things that really made Swannanoa a lot worse than what it was where I was in Black Mountain because they had all of that additional water input from the reservoir. But going back to 2018, they started some revitalization, some work on that North Fork Dam, finished in 2021. And there's been some news articles coming out in the past 7 to 10 days about if that work had not been done, that dam very well could have failed. And that would have taken this from a significant event, and there was significant loss of life in Helene. It would have gone from tens dead on the Swannanoa River to hundreds dead. That is a
wow.
massive amount of water up there. And everything that we're looking at here, all of these homes that are still in place in Swannanoa would have been miles downstream. So we're so thankful that they did that work.
I don't know how many times since Helene I'll get asked a question and I'll be like, well, I'm not a hydrologist, but I
Right.
mean, Evan, you must be in the same boat. It's kind of like, even if you study weather or study science, hydrology is a sector and a study because it has so much to learn, and yet there's still so much of this that seems like it's just the power of Mother Nature. The water goes where the water wants to go.
We think we know, and then we find out the hard way that we don't actually know how all of this works. It makes us better. We will have better predictions for the next storm. We will save more lives, but it's a hard way to learn the
Yeah.
inaccuracies of our science because meteorology, we talk about it sometimes, that meteorology is one of the most underdeveloped sciences. It's also one of the most complex. We like to give ourselves some time, but
Maybe
it
the
really
most
did not get
scrutinized.
right. It really did not get underway. This serious research didn't get underway until 100 years after a lot of the other scientific disciplines. So we are a little bit behind, and we're still learning from events like this.
Evan, this is absolutely outstanding. Looking forward to seeing more of this data in just a moment. But first, if you watched our Carolina Weather Group video at Kennedy Space Center last year, I showed you the inside of the vehicle assembly building. A building that was so big it was hard to comprehend. When you were inside of it, the size was overwhelming. Well, this building is very simple. We are standing in the middle of the IVHS lab, and you can see the fans behind me that crank up to 120, 125 miles an hour when they do experiments in here to test hurricane force winds. Well, today, those are the fans that were driving the 30, 35 mile per hour winds that were blowing that wildfire simulation. Get subscribed. We are counting down to the 500th episode of the Carolina Weather Group, and it's going to be one you're not going to want to miss.
Now, before we wrap up, I would like to show some of the wind damage, which is often the forgotten aspect of Helene. There was a lot of tree loss in and around town, around Asheville, Burnsville, Spruce Pine, but some of the hardest hit areas weren't discovered until 5 to 7 days after the storm. These are places that are up on the mountain, places where people had to cut themselves down for days. I personally went to Elk Mountain, which I'm going to show you here just the other day, and the tree damage was beyond severe. It's like a bomb went off up there, and they had to have cut, in my estimate, 1,000 trees to clear that road, and that is such a monumental task. One of the layers that we're showing here is, and in fact, this yellow to red layer is tree damage. The more red, the more severe that damage is.
Wow.
And this goes to show that a lot of the wind damage we saw was actually on the eastern slopes. And that makes sense as the remnant eye of Helene moved in over Asheville, winds were hammering out of the east and southeast for several hours. And that resulted in anywhere from 5% to 80% tree loss in some of these most severely hit places. And 5% may not sound like a lot, but if there's 400 trees in an acre and 5% of those fall, that's some quick math I should be able to do, but that's a lot of downed trees and a major issue. Zooming out here, this is one of the maps we'll have on 4wnc.org. It will be live soon, not at the time of this recording, but surely by next week. And it really shows you the extent of all of this tree damage. And if we zoom out, you can see that Southwest North Carolina, which opened up fairly quickly after the storm, was spared the worst of it. There's not much of this yellow and red shading down towards Silva, Bryson City, Andrews. These areas didn't have much wind. In fact, I've talked to people down here in Jackson County who said their highest wind gusts were 25 miles an hour at the most. Meanwhile, places like Asheville and Spruce Pine and some of the higher elevations were seeing wind gusts well in excess of 70 miles per hour. This gives us a sense of the true scale here, I think. I've run
Yeah.
some numbers. My estimate in Western North Carolina alone is 300,000 acres of severely damaged forest. Now, that's simply severely damaged. There's plenty of other places, other acres of land where a few trees fell, but it didn't necessarily meet this standard that I have established for severe damage. But you can see these places like Bakersville and Banner Elk, where when you look at these slopes, it's noticeable. They're not going to look the same for years to come.
I appreciate you putting this site and this map together because, we've seen a lot of imagery, I've seen a lot of maps, but there's something about the way you've almost got this like a heat map
Mhm.
across the impacted area where you can kind of see exactly the swath of where the storm was. And like you said, how it does drop off as you go even further into Western North Carolina. Obviously, a lot of the area is severely impacted, but it is really interesting when you think about exactly where Helene's circulation was, and what it managed to do and reach. And Evan, have you seen, as you're looking through this data, evidence to support topographic lift and how that was combined with the storm to really amplify these impacts?
I would say the evidence that I'm seeing is for chaos. There are places where clearly the topography drastically accelerated the winds that were pouring over and slamming into the mountains. In fact, with the example I mentioned earlier, Elk Mountain, which is just down here, and I'll show it again, there's
Yeah.
some significant damage on the northwest slopes. The wind wasn't blowing out of the northwest, at least as a mean wind, average wind direction, but clearly the topography funneled that in some way to do a lot of damage on that slope. That being said, there's other mysteries like Mount Mitchell, which is this long mountain range that you see here. There's not very much tree damage
Hmm.
up there. That is the highest peak east of the Mississippi, hardwood forests down below 5,000 feet, and very little damage, all things considered. So why? I don't know yet. But there are clear indications that topography was one of the dominant drivers of some of the most severe wind in Helene.
Have you seen any evidence? I'm curious. When it came to the Carolinas, it was largely tropical storm Helene. Have you seen anything that might suggest, even on a localized level, that there were hurricane level winds, hurricane level impacts that maybe require closer analysis?
It's a fantastic question, one we'll need to wrestle with for a while before we come to a definitive answer. But I would tell you that I've certainly seen evidence of hurricane force wind gusts. Now, hurricanes are all about sustained winds of in the 70, let's just call it 75 miles an hour.
Sure.
Uh, that was probably only possible in the highest elevations. And it gets really tricky here, and it'll be up to the National Hurricane Center and some scientists far smarter than I to make this final determination. But when you're talking about a hurricane on the coast, winds aloft are much stronger than the winds down on the surface. In fact, you might have 150-mile-an-hour winds a couple thousand feet off the ground, whereas on the beach, it's only 110, 120 miles an hour. In the mountains, you have the full range of elevation from 2,000 feet all the way up to 6,500 feet. And that gets you up into that portion of the atmosphere where the winds are a lot stronger than they are at the surface, if you just establish the surface
Mhm.
as the valleys. So I don't know how they'll make that classification. I don't know if you can say that the top of Mount Mitchell really classifies as surface level winds in a hurricane. It's technically on the surface, but what is the surface in the mountains? I don't know.
Yeah.
Thinking about the trees on Mount Mitchell and how they seem to fare a little bit better than some other lower elevations, I have the feeling that's probably because being so far up, those trees probably face strong winds a lot more often than the lower elevations do, and so they're probably more resilient. The trees that have survived past windstorms are more resilient and more likely to have survived Helene's wind, which would not be the case at some of the lower elevations that ended up seeing some really high winds as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the wind direction was weird here, which makes that even more pertinent because the winds were coming out of the east. That's a strange
Right.
high wind direction for West North
Mm.
Carolina. Normally, our strong winds are typically out of the northwest, occasionally out of the southeast. Um, but I would say this was unlike anything I've seen before. So it caught a
Yeah,
lot of
that
trees by surprise, if we can say that.
yeah, the
Um,
different wind direction than the usual high wind direction probably makes a difference too. I've noticed that when I was helping my dad back in 2020 when we were cleaning up from the, I think it was Zeta, was it Zeta or
yep.
Ada, maybe both of them, that caused some down trees on his property, and we were surprised, even though the winds were not all that high, but the winds were out of the southeast instead of the northwest like they usually are
Yeah.
when the winds are strong there. So the trees were just not used to that wind direction, I guess.
Yep. That's absolutely the case. One last thing I will show before we wrap up here is debris flows. It's been talked about a little bit in the news, and debris flows, it's like a mudslide, but different from a landslide. There's a lot more liquidification involved, where this mountain kind of sloughs off, and a whole section of mountain will quickly slide down into the valley, moving upwards of 40 miles an hour. And this particular map that we've been talking about for the tree damage also highlights the paths of some of the biggest debris flows during Helene. We can see one up here towards Pensacola, and it's marked by this dark red channeling down the terrain.
It's like
These
a
are
bright
places,
vein.
Yeah.
it is absolutely, it's a red vein. And unfortunately, landslides and debris flows are nearly impossible to predict with any sort of precision. A lot of these mountains, a lot of these hills are prone to debris flows, but exactly when and where one occurs is up to Mother Nature. And this time there was this storm, it was Pensacola's turn. It was also Garin Creek and Fairview's turn. So you can see several others that poured down here off the mountain. I was up here in Black Mountain, and little did I know, just over the ridge line, this whole mountainside and spot. So this is sloughing off into Garin Creek community, and this is unfortunately where the Craig family lost 11 members right here, just in Craigtown, Garin Creek, North Carolina. It's so bizarre and surreal to see the channels that this debris took during the storm.
This visualization you've created here, Evan, really helps me and I presume others learn a little bit more about all the nooks and crannies. I think you said it yourself, and I'm going to paraphrase you, but you're from this area, you know this area, you love this area, and you're learning new areas that are tucked into little crevices as you go through, and it makes me feel a little bit better too because I'm even further behind you in the education of understanding all of these the crevices and things, and this event just really the way it interacted with Western North Carolina in particular is just a worst case scenario that is going to be long lasting.
We've learned a lot about what small towns can handle. There's a lot of people here who dealt with the worst and have come out on the better side of Helene. So there's so many reasons to be proud of all of these little communities and what they have managed to accomplish just in 1 month since the storm.
What's the website again, Evan?
forwnc.org. That is FORWNC.org.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us tonight and for putting it together and sharing your story and your expertise with us here on the Carolina Weather Group. I know our audience appreciates it.
Thank you.
It's going to do it for this edition of the Carolina Weather Group. We're going to continue to follow the impacts of Helene in the weeks and months ahead as the recovery efforts continue. Coming up later this month, we're going to mark our 500th episode of the Carolina Weather Group with a special week, quite honestly, taped a week before Helene. And as you probably could understand, have been holding on to it for a moment. Well, as we grow a little bit closer to the Thanksgiving holiday, we're going to take a moment to share some of our memories of the first 500 episodes of this podcast and take you to a place in the Carolinas that is a true treasure and scientific marvel. So we hope you get subscribed, and you can actually find elements of that available to you right now on both patreon.com/Carolina Weather Group, or if you decide to become a YouTube member on our YouTube channel, it's available in both those places as we will be taking time to mark that 500th episode here on the Carolina Weather Group. But again, we're not going any place when it comes to the story of Helene or local weather impacts as we go through the rest of this November month. We'll be continuing to keep an eye on all of that right here on our weekly show, and of course, anytime on our social media channels. So on behalf of Tom and Scotty, Frank, and Evan, I'm James Brierton. We'll talk to you again real soon.